A virgin pretends to be a millionaire's wife for 7 days, but the ending changed everything. Harold Whitmore had been dead for over a month, yet the thick envelope sealed with dark red wax still sat untouched on the mahogany desk in the study of the Beacon Hill mansion. Adrian Whitmore walked past it every day without laying a finger on it. He knew exactly what was inside, and he knew it would bring nothing but trouble. His father had never given him a gift that didn't come with a trap. That morning, Boston lay under a thin veil of fog. Silver-gray light filtered through the curtains, catching on the edge of the desk, illuminating the aged wax seal. Adrian lowered himself into the leather chair, his broad-veined hands resting on the desk surface. He took a deep breath, then cracked the seal with his thumb. The dry snap echoed in the room, like the lid of a coffin shutting for good. Harold's small, precise handwriting danced across the thick paper, each stroke of ink like a tiny blade. Adrian skimmed through the formalities, then reached clause number 15, and felt the blood in his veins turn to ice. To be entitled to the full inheritance, including companies, real estate, investments, and the right to use the Whitmore name in business, Adrian Charles Whitmore must, within a maximum of 7 days from the reading of this will, cause a woman to become pregnant with proper medical confirmation. Otherwise, all assets shall be transferred to the Marlowe Foundation, and the Whitmore name shall be terminated for commercial use. He read it 3 times. The first time, his pulse pounded. The second, his lips curled into a sneer. The third, his laugh spilled out, bitter, echoing through the empty room. Harold had succeeded, even from the grave, in turning his son into a breeding machine. The man who had never once embraced him, never praised him, never forgave, was now demanding a grandchild as if it were a business clause. Memories surged. At 8, being sent to a boarding school in Switzerland, summers spent in a hollow house, the gentle mother he lost at 12 after a long battle with depression. Harold kept signing deals, expanding his empire, never looking back. Adrian's grip tightened on the paper, crumpling its edge. 7 day, he murmured, as if tasting the words. This clause wasn't a challenge. It was an open insult, the last chain binding him to his father's ghost. He rose and walked to the window. Boston sprawled beneath him, its streets twisting like a labyrinth, streetlights blurred in the mist. Beneath the concrete and steel lay a world he had once commanded with a cold, steady hand. Now all of it could vanish in a week. He poured himself a glass of 30-year-old whiskey. The scent of amber and wood smoke filled the air. He took a sip. The burn slid down his throat but couldn't wash away the bitterness clinging to his tongue. Walking away from the inheritance was an option, but he remembered the headmistress at boarding school once telling him, "Some men are born to carry the weight of the world," and he, no matter how much he loathed Harold, couldn't imagine life without the Whitmore name. Out in the hallway, the grandfather clock struck with a dry, unfeeling chime. 7 days, 1 week to find a woman, convince her to carry his child. No love, no time, no choice. A game Harold had designed with meticulous cruelty, confident his son would fail. Adrian looked down at the torn envelope. His father's blade was still sharp, even in death. That night, Adrian sat alone in the study, a black leather notebook open before him. He turned to a fresh page and began to write names. One by one, the faces came to mind. Women from lavish parties, architecture exhibitions, or high-profile business trips. 7 days. He repeated it in his mind like the ticking of a countdown clock. Each name was a plan, a move, and a gamble. First, Lauren Pierce, a famous model who had once accompanied him on a promotional project. Adrian called her that very night. The conversation lasted less than 2 minutes. Lauren burst into laughter, her voice sharp and mocking. "Have you lost your mind, Adrian? I'm a person, not an incubator." The click of the call ending rang in the stillness. Second, Julia Stanton, a wealthy entrepreneur who had once been a close friend of his mother. Julia listened to everything, paused, then said, "Interesting, but if it's my child, I want half of the estate." Adrian swallowed his retort and hung up. Third, Amelia Ross, creative director for a luxury furniture brand. She said she would think about it, but he knew that look in her eyes. The kind that liked to prolong the game just to watch someone else squirm. The first day ended in failure and a deep sense of humiliation. Adrian had known it wouldn't be easy, but he hadn't expected the sting to come so quickly. The next morning, while reviewing the will more carefully, he found an appendix he hadn't noticed before. A hidden clause. If the heir attempts to enter into any financial arrangement to achieve the pregnancy requirement, all assets shall immediately transfer to the Marlowe Foundation. Harold had anticipated even the possibility of him buying a child. A perfect, airtight trap. Adrian closed the folder, inhaling slowly. The father he had once tried to understand had never wanted him to win. On the second night, he tried calling a few less familiar contacts, hoping luck might come from an unexpected corner. But each conversation followed the same pattern. Shock, laughter, refusal, and sometimes sharp-edged mockery. By 10 o'clock, Adrian set the phone down and leaned back in his chair. The high ceiling and dark wood-paneled walls seemed to close in, pressing him into a corner. Outside, Boston's lights still burned bright. Inside, he felt as if he were drifting in a room with no exit. Harold Whitmore had set the board, and Adrian, only a few moves in, could already see every path leading to a dead end. On the afternoon of the second day, while Adrian was in the study trying to find a way to break the trap his father had left, the doorbell rang. He wasn't expecting anyone. The legal aid had arranged to meet him the next morning, and most of the names on his list of potential contacts had already been crossed out. Adrian stepped into the hallway and opened the door. Standing before him was a young woman with chestnut brown hair tied neatly back, deep hazel eyes calm and steady. She wore a white blouse and a navy skirt that fell to her knees, carrying a small suitcase in one hand and a worn notebook in the other. "Hello, I'm Clara Bennett. I've come to take care of Chris." It took Adrian a moment to recall. Chris, the son of his sister, who had died with her husband in a car accident 3 weeks earlier. The court had temporarily placed Chris under his guardianship, but he had barely spent any time with the boy. "He's in the back room," Adrian said, his voice a little dry. "He doesn't make much noise." Clara nodded slightly and stepped inside. Her fingers lingered on the handle of her suitcase, as if holding onto an anchor. The way she crossed the threshold was unlike anyone who had come here before. No glances of awe or curiosity. Adrian returned to the study, but sounds from the far end of the hall kept him from focusing. A child's laughter. Bright, crystalline, unmistakable. Chris had been quiet and withdrawn since losing his parents, but now the laughter rang out again and again. By dinner time, when Adrian entered the living room, he found Clara sitting cross-legged on the floor, holding Chris in her lap, singing a children's song he didn't recognize, while gently swaying him to the rhythm. The warm light from the lamp made the scene look like a tender painting misplaced inside this cold mansion. "He's had dinner already," Clara said, rising gracefully when she saw him. "He's bathed, brushed his teeth, and is ready for bed." Adrian nodded but didn't move. He realized it had been a very long time since someone in this house had looked him in the eye without fear or flattery. "Are you from Boston?" he asked. "No, I'm from a small town in Pennsylvania. I came to Harvard to study psychology, and I stayed on as a nanny. For the love of it?" Clara smiled, a smile tinged with sadness, yet entirely genuine. "To survive, I've had to be many things." That night, Adrian lay in bed listening to the rain against the window. He thought about Clara's smile, the way she held Chris, the sound of her voice that had somehow made the house less cold. He also thought about Harold, and wondered what his father would say if he knew his son was drawn to a stranger from the countryside. The rain lasted through the night, leaving puddles scattered along the cobblestone street outside. The next morning, Adrian came down to the kitchen to find Clara already up, her hair neatly tied back, preparing breakfast for Chris. There was none of the usual ostentation of the household staff. Just a simple table, a small bowl of porridge for Chris, black coffee for her, and a plate of steaming fried eggs. "Good morning, Mr. Whitmore," she said, eyes still on the child's psychology book beside her. "Just call me Adrian." Clara looked up, her voice steady and calm. "I prefer to keep things formal. It's safer that way." That answer lingered with him all morning. Safer. For whom? For her or for him? Over the next few days, Adrian found himself spending more time in the living room or kitchen, wherever Clara and Chris happened to be. He watched how she soothed Chris to sleep, how she patiently answered the boy's endless questions. Something about her presence eased the constant pressure in his chest. One evening after Chris had gone to bed, they sat across from each other in the small dining room. The soft yellow light made the space feel less cold. Adrian, almost without thinking, asked, "Do you have a boyfriend?" Clara hesitated. "No. Ever had one? That's none of your business." He flushed. "You're right. I'm sorry." Clara tilted her head, studying him. "Why do you look so sad?" "I'm not sad." "Yes, you are. I can tell because I've lived with it my whole life. My mother was sad, my grandmother was sad, and so am I. But your sadness is different, older, deeper." Her words touched a corner of himself he rarely acknowledged. That night he lay awake, turning over her phrase, older sadness, and wondering if he had lived his whole life carrying a wound that never healed. The next morning he got a call from Vanessa Hale, an ex from his college days. She said she would accept his proposal in exchange for a substantial sum. A practical solution, free of emotional entanglement. But when he came downstairs and saw Clara playing with Chris, he froze. That scene made him unwilling to reduce the act of having a child to a cold transaction. That evening, he canceled the meeting with Vanessa. On the fourth day, Boston was overcast, the wind cutting through the streets. Adrian found Clara in the living room, reading beside Chris. He stood for a moment, then said, "I need to talk to you." Clara closed her book, waiting. "I need to have a child within a few days. If I don't, I lose everything. And I want it to be you." She didn't look surprised. "Why me?" "Because you're the only person in years who doesn't want anything from me. Because when I'm with you, I feel like Adrian, not the Whitmore heir." Clara was silent for a long moment before she said, "If I agree, it won't be just your child, it will be ours. And that changes everything." He swallowed. "So, what are your conditions?" "You have to be present, from the moment I get pregnant until I give birth, and through the first months afterward. You can't turn it into a business deal, and if it doesn't work, you can't blame me or fire me." Adrian nodded slowly. "I promise." Clara exhaled softly. "Then, I'll think about it until tomorrow morning." In that moment, Adrian realized Harold may have set a cruel game, but for the first time, he felt like he was choosing his own path, not just playing a piece in his father's match. Clara kept her word, giving no immediate answer. Instead, she suggested, "If you want me to consider this seriously, let's spend a full day truly getting to know each other. No business talk, no clauses, just being human together." Adrian was slightly surprised but agreed. It was something he had never done with anyone a whole day, without schedules, without objectives, simply to see each other clearly. They began the afternoon with a walk through Beacon Hill. Cobblestone streets, white-trimmed wooden windows, the scent of baked goods drifting from a corner cafe. Adrian spoke of the streets he used to run each morning. Clara told him about her first winter in Boston, shivering at a cold far harsher than her hometowns. In the evening, Adrian cooked dinner himself, roasted salmon, rocket salad, and a bottle of white wine he had been saving for special occasions. No staff, no clinking of dishes in the background, just a small table in the side dining room, warm yellow light casting a glow over their faces. They ate slowly, talked a lot. Adrian spoke of his distant childhood, of empty summers in a vast cold house, of the gentle mother who left the world when he was 12. Clara shared about the years caring for her grandmother with Alzheimer's, about learning independence early, about the fear of losing those she loved. "My greatest fear is waking up and realizing I'm completely alone," Clara said, her gaze fixed on the candle between them. "And mine," Adrian smiled faintly, "is realizing I have no idea who I am if I strip away all the layers." They sat in silence for a moment, letting the story settle into the air. Outside, the wind swept through the trees. Inside, there was a strange warmth. Adrian realized he had never had a dinner that made him wish time would slow down quite like this. The candle had burned low, the white wine in the bottle was gone, and the space between them seemed to shrink with every story shared. Clara set her glass down, smiling faintly. I think I have my answer. And that is, I'll agree, but only if you remember what I said. This won't just be your child, it will be ours. Adrian nodded slightly. He sensed a certainty in her voice that made him both reassured and determined to be worthy of it. They left the dining room, and Adrian led Clara to a room on the second floor he had prepared earlier that day. Not his own bedroom, but a neutral space. Soft lighting, a few candles, a small vase of flowers, and gentle jazz playing from an old speaker. I want tonight to be something you can remember without regret, he said, his voice low but sincere. Clara looked at him for a long moment before nodding. He stepped closer, asking, May I touch you? Yes. The first touch was as light as if he feared breaking something fragile. They kissed, slowly at first, then deeper, but always with a strange kind of care. There was no rush, no pressure from the 7-day deadline looming overhead, only the connection between two people who had decided to trust each other. When it was over, Clara lay still, breathing deeply. A single tear slid down her cheek, but it wasn't sadness. Are you okay? Adrian asked. I'm okay. Better than okay. It's just the first time I've ever felt truly cherished. They fell asleep in each other's arms, but the peace didn't last. The next morning, Adrian woke to find Clara's side of the bed empty. He found her in the bathroom, her face pale, holding a towel stained with blood. Clara, I'm bleeding more than I should. Without a second thought, Adrian scooped her into his arms, grabbed his keys. We're going to the hospital right now. Don't think about anything else. The rain from the night before had left the road slick, but he didn't slow down. In his mind, everything about the will, the inheritance, the Whitmore name, blurred into nothing. There was only one thing left. Clara had to be safe. Adrian carried Clara into the ER, his steps heavy as if treading on cold stone. The hospital's pale fluorescent lights drained the world of color. A nurse immediately wheeled her onto a gurney, leaving him behind in the hallway. 10 minutes of waiting felt longer than any negotiation he had ever endured. Finally, a young doctor came out, voice firm but gentle. We've stopped the bleeding. She's stable for now, but it's too early to confirm whether she's pregnant. We'll need to check again in at least a week. Adrian nodded, but inside a hollow space opened. 7 days. The deadline in the will would pass long before they had an answer. That evening, once Clara was moved to recovery, Adrian sat by her bed. The glow from the heart monitor lit her face, tired but peaceful. He took her hand, her fingers soft and cold. Adrian, your deadline, Clara murmured, her voice hoarse. Don't talk about it. But if I lose, then I lose. I used to think it was all about the money, but now I can't imagine trading you for anything. She looked at him for a long moment before closing her eyes. Outside the window, Boston's lights spread gold across rain-slick streets. In that moment, Adrian knew he had lost in Harold's game, but won something his father had never touched, the feeling of loving someone more than himself. Clara was kept in the hospital overnight for observation. Adrian never left the room, even when the nurse suggested he go home and rest. He sat in the chair by her bed, his eyes never leaving her face. The steady beep of the heart monitor felt like a quiet reminder. Time was passing, but he no longer cared about it. Near midnight, Clara stirred and opened her eyes. In the dim light, her brown eyes seemed deeper and calmer than usual. You're still here. I'll be here until you tell me to go. Clara was silent for a moment, then spoke in a low, deliberate voice. There's something I've never told you, and I think you need to know. It's about your father. Adrian's brow furrowed slightly, but he kept his hand clasped around hers. He didn't know that the words about to be spoken would open a part of the past he had never imagined, and mark the beginning of a truth that could change everything. Clara looked down at her hands, her voice steady, but with a slight tremor. My mother knew your father. Not just knew him, they had a relationship. Adrian sat frozen, as if the words hadn't fully entered his mind. A heavy silence filled the room. Are you saying we might be... He couldn't finish the sentence. I was afraid of that too, Clara replied softly. That's why, before I accepted this job, I secretly requested a DNA test between you and me. Adrian looked up, his eyes sharp as if to cut through every layer of her defenses. And the result? No, we're not related by blood. He exhaled, so deeply his shoulders sank. But the tension didn't fully dissipate. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Because at first, I wanted to test you. I wanted to see if you were like Harold Whitmore, a man who saw everything and everyone as tools to achieve his goals. Adrian studied her for a long moment. And now? Clara smiled faintly. Now I know you're different. You can be cold, hard, but you know how to cherish, and you know how to love. He took her hand and held it tighter. Thank you for trusting me. A week later, Clara returned to the hospital for a checkup. Adrian went with her, his hand never leaving hers along the antiseptic-scented hallway. The doctor smiled as she opened the results. Congratulations to both of you. She's pregnant, and it's twins. Clara looked at Adrian, her eyes shimmering. He laughed, a rare sound, rising from deep within his chest. In that moment, everything Harold had left, the will, the fortune, the power, faded into the background. The only thing clear was the image of a future family he had never thought he would have. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to believe the storm had passed. But peace, as he should have known, never stayed for long. Just 3 days later, it was shattered. That morning, Adrian was reviewing new blueprints in his office when his assistant called, voice urgent. You need to come to the lobby right now. There's press and Vanessa Hale. The name dragged Adrian back to memories he'd rather avoid. Vanessa, his ex from college, who had left him to chase fame and wealth. When he stepped into the lobby, Vanessa stood in the middle of a crowd of reporters, one hand resting on a slightly rounded belly, her eyes carrying the smugness of someone in full control. I'm here to tell the truth, she declared, her voice crisp so every microphone caught each word. Adrian Whitmore is the father of the child I'm carrying, and I will no longer remain silent. Beside her, a tall man stepped forward, Samuel Marlowe. Adrian recognized the name instantly, the son of Eleanor Marlowe, founder of the Marlowe Foundation, who had lost everything after a deal with Harold Whitmore. Samuel looked at Adrian with a smile as thin as a blade. It's time the Whitmore family paid their debt. News spread like wildfire. Online outlets and TV channels all carried the illegitimate child headline alongside images of Vanessa and Samuel. Clara read the news at the hospital while waiting for her prenatal appointment. Instead of panicking, she tilted her head slightly, her eyes sharpening. She called Adrian. Don't react yet. I need to hear the whole story from you. That evening, when Adrian returned home, Clara was ready with a notebook and pen. He told her everything. The last time he saw Vanessa was over a year ago, at a fundraising gala. They had spoken for only a few minutes, with no physical contact whatsoever. Clara took careful notes, then began gathering information. She tracked down event staff from that night, obtaining security footage that confirmed Adrian had left the party early. She also reviewed publicly available medical records for Vanessa, uncovering several inconsistencies. The pregnancy timeline she had announced didn't match earlier OBGYN visits. The pieces began to align. This wasn't the truth, as Vanessa claimed, but a staged plan, and Clara knew exactly who was pulling the strings. Samuel Marlowe, a man carrying a grudge not only against Harold, but now against Adrian as well. The pieces were in place. All that remained was to strike. Clara arranged to meet Samuel Marlowe at a quiet cafe in Back Bay. She carried a small recorder hidden in her handbag. Samuel assumed Clara was there because she doubted Adrian, so he let his guard down completely. Vanessa just needs to put on a show for a few minutes. The media will handle the rest, Samuel said confidently. And the baby? Clara asked. Samuel smirked. She was never pregnant, Samuel said, leaning back with a smirk that didn't reach his eyes. A few carefully staged photos, the right lighting, and a convincing sob story. That's all it takes to bring Whitmore crashing down. Every word was captured clearly. Shortly after, Clara uncovered proof that Vanessa had received a large payment from an account controlled by Samuel, exactly 1 week before her press appearance. On top of that, medical records showed she hadn't been pregnant at any point in the last 12 months. Clara brought all the evidence back to Adrian. Together, they discussed strategy. Releasing it immediately would flip the scandal against their enemies, but negotiating could reclaim more than just reputation. 2 days later, in a law office, Adrian and Samuel sat across from each other. Adrian's voice was calm but razor sharp. "I have everything. The recording, the bank transfer, the medical files. If we go public, you and Vanessa lose everything. But I'm willing to keep it quiet if you withdraw any claim to the Whitmore estate and sign a commitment to stay out of my business operations for good." Samuel stayed silent for a long moment, then nodded. He knew the game was lost. As they left the room, Adrian turned to Clara, the corner of his mouth lifting slightly. "This time, we won on our terms." The victory over Samuel and Vanessa closed one chapter, but something far more important awaited ahead. 6 months later, the first cries of life rang through a Boston hospital delivery room. Evelyn and James, healthy, rosy-cheeked twins, lay in Clara's arms. Adrian stood beside her, eyes misty but fixed on the sight. The Whitmore estate changed day by day. Dark wood walls were painted lighter, windows thrown open to welcome the sun. The once cold living room now overflowed with children's laughter. Chris, now 4 years old, ran through the halls calling Clara Mom and Adrian Dad, as if it had always been the truth. Adrian was no longer the man who lived only by schedules and deadlines. He learned how to wake in the middle of the night to rock a baby back to sleep, how to make pancakes on Sunday mornings, and that Clara's laughter could chase away even the gloomiest day. One spring afternoon, Vanessa appeared at the mansion gates. Gone was the arrogance. She stood quietly, her eyes tired. "I came to apologize," Vanessa said, her voice unsteady, "and to thank you for not destroying me when you had every reason to." Adrian started to reply, but Clara stepped forward gently. "We've all made mistakes. What matters is knowing when to stop. I forgive you." Vanessa nodded faintly and turned away. Clara looked back at Adrian, and he knew this house, this family, had become the true legacy, one his father could never have built. Spring in Boston moved gently, and within the Whitmore estate, a new chapter was unfolding every day. That night, with the twins sound asleep and Chris tucked in under Clara's careful hands, Adrian stepped out onto the second-floor balcony. The night breeze carried the scent of magnolias from the newly planted garden. Clara joined him, draping a light shawl over his shoulders. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "About everything we've been through. About how, if someone had told me a year ago I'd have a family like this, I would have laughed and walked away." Clara smiled, standing beside him, both gazing at the golden glow spilling from the nursery window. "I used to think I didn't belong anywhere, but now we've found a home." Adrian turned to her, his eyes serious but warm. "I want to make a promise right now," he said, his voice low but unwavering. "I will raise our children with love, the kind that holds, listens, and stays. Not with the distance and pressure this family once chained me with. I will break that cold cycle, no matter what it takes." Clara took his hand and squeezed it gently. "I believe you." They stood in silence, listening to the wind and the steady breathing of the house at rest. The next morning, the whole family gathered in the living room, Chris hugging Evelyn, Adrian holding James, and Clara sitting beside them with a radiant smile. Laughter echoed against the walls, and Adrian knew with certainty that the true legacy he would leave would never be locked in a safe or written on a deed, but would live in this very moment. Love, family, and a home filled with warmth. Spring wind drifted in from the garden, carrying the scent of magnolia and freshly cut grass. In the living room, the children's laughter rang like strings of glass chimes. Adrian stood quietly in the doorway, a steaming cup of coffee in hand, taking in the scene before him. A kind of peace he had once believed he would never touch. Clara sat on the sofa, hair falling loosely, cradling Evelyn, who slept soundly in her arms. James lay in the cradle, occasionally waving his little hands, letting out soft coos. Chris sat beside them, eagerly telling his baby sister about the wooden horses he'd seen in the park the other day, as if she were old enough to understand every word. The pale gold of morning light streamed through the windows, bathing everything in warmth. Adrian told himself he would carve this moment deep into memory, so that if a storm ever came, he would remember there had once been a home filled with laughter. Clara looked up, meeting his gaze. No words were needed. They both understood what the other was thinking. He crossed the room and sat beside her, slipping an arm gently around her shoulders. "What are you thinking?" she asked, her voice so soft only the two of them could hear. "That we've come so far. And I'm also wondering how many more challenges lie ahead." Clara smiled, leaning her head against his shoulder. "Challenges are something we can't avoid. But as long as we keep choosing to stay, there'll only be challenges, not endings." Adrian tightened his hold on her. He wanted to believe that, yet deep inside, a shadow remained. The shadow of Harold Whitmore that had never fully faded. The Whitmore name was still on contracts, on company signs, in every boardroom he entered. He had promised Clara he would turn it into a different kind of legacy, but he knew that those who had hated Harold might still be waiting for their chance. As if to confirm his unease, the phone on the table rang. Adrian stood, picked it up, and saw an unfamiliar number. He hesitated for a moment before bringing it to his ear. "Mr. Whitmore?" A deep male voice, unfamiliar, but one that clearly knew who he was. "I'm calling about a document from your father. You might want to see it." Adrian froze for a fraction of a second. "Who are you?" "Someone who holds a piece of the past Harold never left in his will. And that past has something to do with your family now." The line went silent for a heartbeat, then the call disconnected. He stood still for several seconds, eyes on the garden, but mind far away from the house. Those words felt like a stone dropped into a still pond, sending ripples outward. Clara came over and rested her hand on his arm. "Something wrong?" Adrian looked at her, ready to say no, but her eyes, the same eyes that had once recognized the old sadness in him, stopped him. "Someone just said, they know something about my father, and about us." Clara was quiet for a moment, then gave a small nod. "Then we'll hear what they have to say, but not today. Today is ours." He looked back at her, and for some reason, that answer made him feel as though he still stood on solid ground. Whatever was waiting ahead, he knew he wouldn't face it alone. Outside, white clouds drifted slowly across the Boston sky. Inside, Evelyn stirred in her mother's arms. James let out his very first laugh, and Chris squealed as if he'd just discovered something magical. Adrian and Clara both turned toward the children, letting the mystery slip toward the future. A future whose shape they could not yet see, but one they would step into together.